O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Welcome back, everyone. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I have a special conversation for you guys today with Snek, of course, our Twitter ortho bro, who is an incredible Orthodox scholar on history, and we are going to be discussing the Papacy and the Canons of the first 7 councils. So thank you, Snek, for joining me today. How you doing?
Doing great, thank you.
Thank you, man. We've been trying to put a conversation together for a while, so I'm just really thankful we finally found the time and topic to actually have a conversation on. And just from the onset, I'm going to say I am not very knowledgeable about our topic today, so you're going to be doing most of the education for sure. I kind of have a superficial understanding of the 7 councils, what each one was trying to do, what they were refuting. And then I read over some of your canons that you sent in regards that kind of directly refute the papacy. And I was shocked after reading through it. It was pretty explicit. I wasn't aware of those.
Yeah, right. So this list of canons, you can find all of this in volume 14 of the Chalcedon. Chav did a great work. Most of this is also available on there's a big Catholic stuff with all the councils on the internet. I don't remember exactly the name of it, but yeah, you can find it there as well. And this question arises: why? Because when you have people coming from Protestantism, from atheism, or even from some branches of Roman Catholicism, and especially in today's world, they're inspecting Christianity and the roots of Christianity, and they're inspecting the church, because we know that today we have a multiplicity of churches around the world that claim to be the original church. And at some point, the question is, people saying superficial thing in the Vatican and changes like, the Novus Ordo and things like this are trying to look back into history and question this history. And how do we they go about that? Oftentimes it's just going on catholicanswers.org, just skimming the internet, and what you'll see there is quote mines from church fathers. That's a thing you are bound to see, quote mines from church fathers and appeals to 4 specific verses of the Bible and making them sound obvious. So it's basically sola scriptura plus quote mine. What you'll find there. And I've covered this in a previous slide with George and Jediah, and the link is going to be in the description. But these quote mines cannot be taken as such, because you have forged documents in them. You have them taken with wrong translations. You have them being taken out of context, and you have them being interpreted in specific manners. So that's why I advise, if you cannot read the entirety of the Chalcedon, which no normal person has time to do, what I would suggest is not to look through specific quotes pulled out of Father's letter without context and so on, but looking at where tradition expresses itself fully, where all the fathers, what all the fathers agree to, and these are ecumenical councils. And these are the canons of the councils. So I would suggest to look at this, because you don't have to do the reinterpretation. You don't have to put them back into context. Canons are supposed to be clear. Some are less clear, but it's way easier than you're just stumbling onto quote mines, because if you're looking at the church fathers, it's very difficult to see, unless you spend an ungodly amount of times. But to see where the consensus is. Someone can just pull out quotes from here and there. We look, sometimes it comes from the PL and the PG, which have different versions. Sometimes it's completely removed The context of, for example, St. Cyprian of Carthage being a hardcore Romist, even though he was involved in crises that opposed him directly to Rome, and he died in schism with Rome. So when he said, "Out of the church is no salvation," outside of the church is no salvation, it cannot mean it in the Roman sense. So what we're going to do today is we're going to inspect canons and the history of the 7 Ecumenical Council. Nicaea, Constantinople 1, Ephesus, Chalcedon, Constantinople 2, Constantinople 3, and Nicaea 2, as well as in Trula. And we're going to explain why Trula. And then I will also go to some other councils that were local and that show that even on a non-ecumenical scale, we can see that the papacy, as is being defined by the Vatican today, isn't present, or even that the council to reach their appeal actually contradicts themselves. So it contradicts their position. So before starting, we're just going to go through what Abbe Guette, Vladimir Guette, explains, is that in order to have the papacy as we see today, meaning after the great earthquake, that is new ecclesiology of Vatican I, which itself is a continuation of changes, you need to find 4 criteria to the Roman primacy. So first of all, it needs to be seen, it is defined as apostolic, as being from the scripture, from the time of the apostle, and evidence. So you have to see immediacy of power. This is in pastoral terms. So it needs to be immediate. The second hoop you have to go through is to show that there is supremacy, meaning that the power of Rome needs to be supreme. So it's not special prerogatives only. It is supreme power, full power over all of the clergy and laity. Then you have to have universality. So this power needs to be applicable from Rome to the entirety of the church. And the last one is exclusivity. It means that the legacy of Peter and the powers that are supposedly bestowed on Peter needs to be displayed by Rome alone. So these are the 4 hoops you need to go through to prove that there's a supreme papacy, which is a form that appears really historically, starting a little bit before the Council of Florence.
So say those all 4 one more time. The first one is what?
So you have immediacy. So this is understood from the beginning. You have supremacy. So the powers of the Pope are absolute. You have exclusivity, meaning that it is only for Rome, not for the other patriarchy, not from the other patriarchs, and universality. So it is displayed everywhere.
Gotcha.
And then you have a 5th hoop that's also interesting, that which is relative to the infallibility power. So you have criterion for infallibility. They're not that hard to reach. It's when the Pope, as a Pope and not a private doctor, gives a new doctrine, defines a new doctrine of pertaining to faith and morals for the entire church, then this decision is supposed to be infallible and irreformable.
Right. And that was extraordinary. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was what was so surprising for me running through the canons, was the sort of refutation explicitly about Rome or the Pope or any single bishop being able to change doctrine or condemn or to promote a bishop or anything like that.
Yeah. So if any of these are broken, if we can see that this is not applied, then there's a real problem concerning the papacy. Some people will appeal to evolution of dogma. We actually will see that there are canons that directly contradict the evolution of dogma. So you cannot say that the papacy evolved like this, because when you appeal to Matthew 16:18 as being evident, self-evident, you are appealing to apostolic doctrine. So we need to be able to see it from the beginning, all of this. And we're going to start. So we're going to start with the we're actually going to start with the Apostolic Council. because
okay.
this is from the Bible, and that's actually a good refutation of Protestantism, because the form of the church is concilia from the beginning. So when the question arises of how should non-Hebrew enter the church, there's this council in Acts 15, and we see, contrary to what the canons of the Catholic Church says, that the president of this assembly is not Saint Peter, Divine Apostle Peter. It is Saint James, who is very authoritative, who makes a final declaration, who gives speech to the other one, and who concludes the synod. Here, a common argument would be to say that Peter at some point stands up, which will refer to a council under David in the Old Testament. Maybe standing up denotes some level of authority. Peter is one of the 4 pillars of the church. However, the final decision, the decree, and the word in Greek is especially strong. It's ego krino. This is pronounced by David in the same council, and this is pronounced by James in Acts 15. So the final decision is one of James, and directly after you have the synodal letter, which is sent to all the bishops, to all the church, which is directly taken from what James decided. So we can see that from the beginning, we see decisions being taken not by Peter alone. I'm not saying that James is the Pope, I'm just saying that it's publicly authoritative. We see that in Galatians 2 is mentioned first, is very important. We have church fathers that mention him as being the one who gave also to an extent the priesthood, because he was a Levite priest. He is also, according to tradition, the brother of Christ, because he was the son of Joseph and a previous wife. So that would be the beginning, and we see that there's no immediacy, there's no supremacy. It's supposed to be over, but let's continue now with one of the most famous council, Nicaea, the first Ecumenical Council, Nicaea, 325. And we can see that it starts directly by explaining how bishops are to be elected and to be named. And we have Canon 4 saying that bishops must be elected by other bishops of the region. There's no mention of the Pope. So I'll read this canon actually because it's interesting. It is by all means desirable that a bishop should be appointed by all bishops of the province. But this is difficult because of some pressing necessity or the length of the journey involved. At least let at least 3 come together and perform the ordination, but only after the absent bishop have taken part in the vote and given their written consent. But in each province, the right of confirming the proceedings belong to the metropolitan bishop. So yeah, here you can see that it already establishes basic ecclesiology. There are different provinces, there are different metropolitans who have some level of authority, but naming bishops is done by other bishops. And that's something you will see consistently. And why is this important and relevant? Because Rome has adopted a dogma that states that a bishop cannot name other bishops. Only the Pope, and only with the approval of the Pope, can you name other bishops. And that's especially important because you look, for example, at the SSPX and Lefebvre and so on. He was excommunicated latae sanctiae, so ipso facto, because he actually named other bishops without asking the Pope. That begs another question. Ordination, including ordination of bishops, is one of the sacraments. And if if the sacraments were divinely instituted, and if the papacy was divinely instituted as being superior to the other bishops, right, why isn't these sacraments, being specified? Peter names the bishops, right, and the successors of Peter names the bishops. We'll see it consistently. So these canons pertaining to the naming and ordination of bishops are all over. So I would just, I'll not read all of them because there are many. But this is already nice.
Snek, may I just stop you for a second? Because some of the people watching aren't going to be as familiar with the various councils. And so just to give a context, and then I just want to let you keep going because you're killing it, is that the First Council of Nicaea, again, you mentioned 325, but what they were trying to do, they were addressing Arianism, so Christology. They were celebrating the Pascha, so they're setting the date for Easter. They're talking about the validity of baptism and the establishment of the Nicene Creed. And they recognized the sees of Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and gave a special place for Jerusalem. And so I just wanted to give that context for the people listening who aren't going to be, so I kind of have a few bullet points for each council just to give context for some of the people listening that aren't going to be as familiar with the history like you are. I mean, you're much more knowledgeable about the history than I am. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to give that context for people listening.
Yeah, sure. Actually, we should give more context. So first of all, this council is not assembled by the Pope. This council is assembled by and called by Emperor Constantine. All the ecumenical council, meaning imperial councils, are actually called by emperors, and is not presided by the Pope or by papal legates. So actually, there are two papal legates that were sent. The person presiding is actually Josius of Cordova, who is a Westerner, but works pretty much independently. Actually, if he's presiding, it's not because he's a Westerner, it's because he's actually very close to Emperor Saint Constantine, because he is at this point he has been living in Constantinople for a little bit. Something else that is interesting is that you mentioned Pascha, and that's very interesting because there have been previously, some years before the Council of Nicaea, a controversy between the Pope and the bishops of Asia, and the Bishop of Asia celebrated Pascha differently than Rome and the rest of the church did. It was a specificity you could see around Ephesus, and the Pope wanted to condemn them, to cut them off from communion, which actually happened quite a bit. It doesn't mean that it's purely a papal prerogative. We can see anathemas being sent between different sees and so on. But actually, the Pope is being as he wants to do it, is being rebuked by Saint Irenaeus of Lyons, who acted more independently. In France, he was a primate of the Gauls, and actually rebukes him, telling him not to do it. And what's interesting is that even though the Pope was right in this very case, Pascha is very important, and that's why even us Orthodox, who have two different calendars, we are still doing the same Easter, right? Still celebrating the same Easter. Because the Pope was right, it wasn't settled until Nicaea settled it. Yeah, that's very important. There is another canon which is especially important, is Canon 6. So Canon 6 states, the ancient customs of Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis shall be maintained, according to which the Bishop of Alexandria has authority over these places in a similar custom. Since a similar custom exists with reference to the Bishop of Rome, similarly in Antioch and the other provinces, the prerogatives of the churches are to be preserved. In general, the following principle is evident. If anyone is made bishop without the consent of the metropolitan, this great synod determines that such a one shall not be a bishop. If, however, two or three, by reason of personal rivalry, dissent from the common vote of all, provided it is reasonable and in accordance with the church canon, the vote of the majority shall prevail. This canon is especially important for ecclesiology because it is showing that Rome doesn't have universal jurisdiction. There are special jurisdictions that are free from the other jurisdiction, and most notably Antioch, Rome, and Alexandria. So you have the establishment of free patriarchate. And it is not because of Matthew 16:18. It is because of tradition, the ancient custom. So you can see that here you have special prerogatives given to Rome, but not exclusively to Rome, and not because of something that's linked to Peter, to Saint Peter, to divine Apostle Peter, but to tradition.
Right. And then
Something
that's
else that's
mentioned
very
multiple
important.
times. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump over you, but that was mentioned multiple times throughout the canons, is about the veneration of what Rome used to be, and then Constantinople being the new Rome. And so it's just an honorific kind of place that they occupy. It has nothing to do with having any sort of primacy over the other various sees.
Yeah, there's a primacy in honor, but there are also specific prerogatives, which we'll cover just in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So here we can also see in this canon, everything will be linked as in description, that if there is a controversy, the name of the bishop should be done in synodality, still under the authority of the metropolitan, the local metropolitan. So we can see this relation in the Orthodox Church between a more decentralized view and the understanding of primacy in some places. So we are giving specific honors and specific prerogatives to the patriarchs, but ultimately they are bishops still. So that's something that's very important. Common counter-arguments to the Council of Nicaea and the establishment of this ecclesiology are actually the Council of Sardica, which comes a little bit later. So, but in some canons, which are quoted, so there have been forgeries of the canons of Nicaea that included the canon of the Council of Sardica, which we accept. And the Council of Sardica establishes Rome as not so much a court of appeal, but a pre-court of appeal, meaning that if there is controversy in the west and the east, Rome has the power to be appealed to, and to declare, yes, there is a problem. As a primate of the West, he has a right Rome has a right to see if there are litigations in the East, and then declare, yes, there needs to be a judgment. It doesn't mean that Rome judged directly. You can in the canons of Sardica, actually Rome declares that there needs to be a judgment, and then the judgment is passed in the East. Even still, that's the special prerogatives of Rome. We're going to see that these special prerogatives are being transferred to Constantinople, and today the prerogatives of the Council of Sardica actually apply to the Patriarch of Constantinople. So, another interesting thing. But this council is very important. It is not as authoritative as Nicaea, though, because Nicaea is ecumenical. Now we go on to another council that is just great, the second one, Constantinople. And we're going to give some context to this council. So this is a council against the Ptomatomachos, Macedonians.
And Arianism. And this is 381, correct?
Yeah.
381, and it has to do with establishing the sort of begotten nature of Christ before all time, before the Logos before all time. And it was revising some of the Nicene Creed in regard to the Holy Spirit, correct?
Yeah, it was completing the Nicene Creed and establishing the Holy Spirit as hypostasis, as fully divine. So that's when you can see that the Trinity is fully fleshed out. Right. And this council is especially important because of the context during which it happens. So, of course, it is called by the emperor and not the pope, but it happens in schism with Rome and Alexandria, because it happens after the Luciferian controversy. So previously there has been persecutions of the Christians, and then a question and a schism over the doctrine of Lucifer Cagliari, who didn't want people who relinquished, who denounced the faith and the persecution to re-enter the communion. And actually, Lucifer Cagliari named a bishop of Antioch, so a patriarch, was named by Lucifer Cagliari, and there was a big contention between, on the one side, Rome and Alexandria, who supported this bishop named by Lucifer was Paulinus, and Jerusalem, Antioch, and Constantinople, with the legitimate patriarch of Antioch, Saint Meletius. So this council is called actually in schism with Rome. And the basic counter-argument would say that, oh no, actually it wasn't schism. If you look at what Carl Joseph FLA, so a very famous Roman Catholic historians of the council, who actually was there on Vatican I, he says that no, actually the documents that are being propped up during the Renaissance to say that the Pope was invited and the Pope was in communion actually refer to another council that is not this one. And probably, I mean, they're brought up by Cardinal Baronius, who is a notorious forger as well. So even FLA doesn't go this way. So here we have a council that is ecumenical, that professes truth of faith, because it's a creed that completes a creed that is fully ecumenical, happening outside of the Communion of Rome. And many people will say, oh, Rome accepted later, that's why it's ecumenical. It doesn't matter, because it means that truth of faith, that the Holy Spirit descended upon the council without needing the Pope. It means that you can have a true ecumenical council happening without the Pope, outside of the communion of the Pope. And
recognized by Rome.
And recognized it by Rome later. So even if Rome recognized it, it doesn't matter, because the council expresses truth, right, and shows that there is no need for Rome for the truth.
Right.
You know,
right.
Basically, exactly. like what the Sedevacantists will realize in 100 years. You know, oh, we've kept the truth without Rome. So yeah, this council is actually a good argument. We've opposed this to Eric Ibarra when he was on my Discord, and he couldn't answer this one, because regardless, you know, of the Pope accepting it, what's happened during an ecumenical council is something specific. It's the Holy Spirit sealing the canons, sealing the creed. Yeah, that's very interesting. But let's look at the canons, and I'm not going to read this one because it's quite long, but Canon 2 again shows that you have separate jurisdictions, that the bishops needs to stay within that jurisdiction, is that there are different regions, and there's no special mention of Rome, you know, even though this should be at this point. And what is very interesting is Canon 3. So Canon 3 states, the Bishop of Constantinople, however, shall have the prerogative of honor after the Bishop of Rome, because Constantinople is a new Rome.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So here you have the prerogative of honor, which is not the other special prerogatives that we've explained with the Council of Sardica, but this lays a ground for later canons that we're going to see in the following councils. I need to add that each of the ecumenical council recognize the previous ecumenical council and the canons. Right. So we'll see that at some point Rome decides to not recognize some canons. Actually, they are recognized later on. And it also recognizes other councils that I will actually cover in the next section. So then we have the Council of Ephesus in 431. Right. So some background, again, it is convened by the emperor. This time the 4 sees are in communion, so everybody's invited. And what's happening at Ephesus is actually fighting against Nestorianism. Right. Nestorianism is a doctrine that the two natures of Christ are not only distinct, but segregated from one another. So actually, when you worship Christ, you don't worship the hypostatic union, the man God. You worship only the divine part of Christ. Mm-hmm. So this was held by the then Bishop of Constantinople, Nestorius. Many people would point to this to say, oh, look, Constantinople makes mistake, which is which is fine by us, because basically every see during history fell to heresy at some point. And we are not a Constantinopolitan church. We are not an Antiochian church. We are not an Alexandrian church or a Russian church. We are the Orthodox church. And at some point, you have people, places straying away, and councils are called, and yeah. So during this council, Nestorius is rebuked. But what's very interesting is that people called Nestorius and excommunicated Nestorius before the council, namely the Pope of Rome. The Pope of Rome declared him a heretic. If there is supremacy and if there is universal jurisdiction, this would have sufficed. If tomorrow the Pope calls someone a heretic, somewhere he's a heretic. So yeah, so the mere fact that this council existed shows that that the power of the Pope, even though he has some special prerogatives, still needs to be expressed in the council. Right. And also, this council is not presided by the Pope as a papal prelates. It is presided very much by Saint Cyril of Alexandria. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now,
so I'm going to go.
And the Council of Ephesus too is when we've established Mary as the Theotokos, correct?
Ephesus 1. Ephesus 2 is actually.
Ephesus 2.
The robber council.
Right, the robber council, right. And that's not actually recognized. Yeah.
I suggest watching the video of the real Medway. So this deals with the anti-Chalcedonian church. Okay. There is a bit Patriarch of Constantinople to death during Ephesus 2.
Yeah, and say that one more time, what video you're recommending the viewers to go watch?
So David the real Medway, who's been a great apologist, has done a series of videos about the anti-Chalcedonian churches. So he is showing that they are moving away from the teachings of the fathers. So even though they seem to retain some level of Orthodox ecclesiology, which would not be covered in this video, they strayed away from the teachings of the fathers. And the Council of Ephesus too, we might actually cover it just a bit later. But yes, it is straying away from the teachings of the fathers. And it is not recognized. It's seen as a robber council. Right. So I'm going to finish on Ephesus, and I'm going to add a quick note on Ephesus too, because it also disproves the papacy. So Canon 6 establishes the church as ecumenical. So I would say, likewise, if any should in any way attempt to set aside the order of each case made by the Holy Synod at Ephesus, the Holy Synod decrees that if they bishop or clergyman, they shall absolutely forfeit their office. If laymen, they should be excommunicated. So we see that everybody is subjected to the decrees of the council, even the Pope. Mm-hmm. Even though we know that in today Roman Catholic ecclesiology, the Pope is the cornerstone of the church, so he's the one who determines who is part of the church or not. Here, there's no exemption for the bishop. So, if the bishop actually moves away from the decrees of the synod, he would be set outside of communion, and that actually covers Canon 7, which is very important. So we'll read it. When this thing had been heard, the Holy Synod decreed that it is unlawful for any man to bring forward or to write or to compose a different faith as a rival to that established by the Holy Fathers assembled with the Holy Ghost in Nicaea. But those who should dare to compose a different faith or to introduce or offer it to persons desiring to turn to the acknowledgement of the truth, whether from heathenism or Judaism, or from any heresy whatsoever, shall be deposed, if they be bishop of clergymen, bishop from the episcopate, and clergymen from the clergy. If they be laymen, they shall be anathematized. Right. So here you see that what Ephesus is saying is that contradicting the creed, because it is a faith, symbol of the creed that is brought for Ephesus, which is a Nicene Constantinopolitan creed that was completed during the Council of Constantinople, changing this would mean that you are excommunicated. There is no exemption for the Pope, and we see that it's important because at some point after the Council of Aachen, you have the Filioque appearing in the West and ultimately being promoted by the Pope. So according to this canon, he should be anathematized or deposed. And it is confirmed by Canon 6 because he also broke the canons. Yeah. Canon 8 is giving some sources as well, explaining that ecclesiastical constitution canons of the apostles that are to be respected, that we are to respect the ancient customs, canon of the Blessed Father, and ancient custom. So it establishes the council firmly in continuation of the teachings of the apostles. There is no Rome being the stone that determines the faith. No mention of this. So that will be the end for Ephesus. A quick note on Ephesus 2. Many people would point to Ephesus 2 to say, oh, you see, the Pope determines that Ephesus 2 is not a real synod. Therefore, we don't have to follow it. It is true that the Pope determines that the synod is not true. However, does the Pope determine that the synod is not true, saying, oh, I am the guy who has all ultimate authority? No, he said that the proceedings of the synod make it unfit, because there was a battery during the synod, and actually Bishop of Constantinople was beaten. Some sources say that he died 4 days later. Some say that he dies some months later, but he apparently died from wounds received during the synod. But we can reject it on the same basis as the Pope of Rome. We don't, like, the Pope of Rome doesn't reject it because he's the pillar of the faith. He rejects it because the proceedings were uncanonical. Right. Yeah. Now we move on to the Council of Chalcedon. So the Council of Chalcedon is a council that actually is here to contradict Ephesus 2. The council that here to that is called to fight against the mere physics.
Right. And this is 451. So the Second Council of Ephesus is 449. So we're just talking about a couple years later.
Yeah. So in our understanding, this council responds to the Council of Ephesus 2 and rebukes Eutychus mostly, who had an understanding of mere physics that bordered monophysitism. And actually, Ephesus 2 was here to save Eutychus. Right. And actually, what's very funny is that Eutychus ended up being rejected by the anti-Chalcedonian churches. So, their council. Basically, they said, we follow the teaching of Cyril, so much so that we need to do another council after Ephesus to complete the teachings of Cyril and to save Eutychus, and then reject Eutychus. And what you will see oftentimes when you're talking to anti-Chalcedonians, and again, David studied this way more than I did, but you will see them saying, oh yes, we have a similar understanding of mere physics, we have the same theology, to which, depending on what they mean by mere physics, we can agree to. But then we say, yes, so you can accept Chalcedon. And then we say that, oh, Chalcedon is Nestorian. So, which means that we do not have the same understanding of mere physics.
Right.
It's self-refuting.
And it's at this council where we establish the hypostatic union of Christ, correct? Fully human, fully divine.
Yeah. So it establishes the two natures of Christ in hypostatic union. So there's a Chalcedon formula which is like so there are 4 without, but it's like without distinction, without confusion, without change. I don't have them all in mind, but the idea is that the subject is always the united hypostasis of Christ. But we can of course see that there are qualities that refer to the natures in Christ that are distinct, united but distinct. For example, eating is not a property of the divine nature, and walking on water is not a property of the human nature. And this Neo-Cyrillian understanding is actually prolonged in the next council that we'll cover. What's very interesting is that a lot of Roman Catholic will point to as a term of Lear during Chalcedon, and it is anti-Chalcedonian says that the term of Lear is Nestorian, but the term of Lear qualifies because it is defining a doctrine, because it is about faith, because it is in an ecumenical council, because it is by Pope, it qualifies for an ex cathedra status. So this declaration, if ex cathedra existed, if there was this understanding that Vatican I claims to reveal, the term of Lear that is presented during the synod should have been accepted as is. But no, it's been cross-examined for 5 days with the writings of St. Cyril. So the pillar of orthodoxy during Chalcedon is not Pope Leo, it is St. Cyril, which refutes both the anti-Chalcedonian and the papist,
right?
The Roman Church. Let's look at the canons of Chalcedon because we have some very interesting ones. Canon 1, we have judged it right that the canons of the Holy Father made in every synod until now should remain in force. So that's something you see in every synod. So everything we've previously discussed, it's still valid, it's reinforced. Canon 5, concerning bishops or clergymen who go about from city to city, it is decreed as a canon enacted to the Holy Father should still remain in their force. So we are reaffirming the clear boundaries between the churches. We are reaffirming that they are independent and in communion. No special mention of Rome, no special mention of, oh, Rome actually supersedes everything. So yeah, Canon 9, I'm not going to read it entirely, but it says that if there is something litigious, they should appeal to their jurisdiction. And then we have something that's very interesting. Right. If the bishop or clergyman should have a difference with the metropolitan of the province, let him have recourse to the exarch of the diocese or to the throne of the imperial city of Constantinople, and let there be tried. So we can see that Constantinople functions as a court of appeal.
Yes, the head of the hierarchy.
Yeah. So we see that to an extent, prerogatives belonging to Rome, as a court of appeal or pre-court of appeal, expressed in Sardica, are already here, present in the Council of Chalcedon, being applied to Constantinople. Canon 10 is about jurisdictional boundaries. So you see that this concept of supremacy and unity, jurisdictional unity, it's not present at all. We have tons of canons saying let them be independent. We are in communion, but the churches are to manage themselves. And we even have people say, oh, that means you're different churches. That means the communion of the Orthodox is just like the communion of the Protestant. It's purely mystical. I mean, that's what the canons say, and these agree to this in councils. So we are one body, but decentralized, and that's actually a strength of the Orthodox Church, because if there's a heresy showing up somewhere, it can be seen, it can be discussed, and it can be cleansed. The church is a theanthropic body.
And that kind of autonomous nature of the individual jurisdictions, I think, resonates with our theology of personhood, and that real communion. I mean, it's tied to the free will concept. I mean, theologically speaking, it's tied to personhood and sort of the autonomy of individuals. Yet that's how communion really takes place. Communion can only take place through autonomous individuals, and then that's kind of symbolically, theologically associated with the various jurisdictions, right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, obviously, all these things happen, and the communion, there's a body of Christ that appears in every church. It appears in every jurisdiction during celebration of the Eucharist. That doesn't mean we divide in Christ. It means unity, on the contrary. And actually, it is this that protects the church. It is this independence and this, ability for us to detect heresy where it shows up, so it doesn't infect the entire body. It is the ability even to schism. What protects unity? The ability to detect heresy and schisms from it, if need be. We can heal it or we can cut it, and that's what we see with councils. Nestorius, a heretic, we remove him from the communion. So this is what protects unity. But if you got just one central authority that controls everything, if this guy falls, everything topples down. And that's what happened with Vatican II. People never thought that Vatican II could happen, and many people want to contradict Vatican II, but I know the guy who was in charge of the unity is for it. What do? We cannot do anything. We cannot schism away from it, because that will make us sedevacantist. So we cannot protect the faith, and the faith is to be protected, and unity stems from the faith, and it all scrambles down.
Right.
So this is the ability. So if you're complaining about the ability of the church to schism, you're complaining about every single council, because the council sees a heresy, removes it, and the church is a theanthropic body. It is a divino-human entity, and at some point in history, every member of the church, every part of the church, was sick at some point, and it was healed by the rest. And that's why we have this healing process, this continuous healing process. The church as being an hospital. You can see it in St. Chrysostom and all this. So this is, where people are trying to show is that this is actually, oh no, it shows you're not united. And so it is the strength, and all unity is only stronger with it, because we can conserve the faith and be united in this faith and this communion. Yeah, very important point. Canon 12, no bishop is allowed to set up two metropolitans in one province, lest he be excommunicated, and a bishop who does this loses his rank. No exemption for the Pope. Oh, there are 3 Roman Catholic patriarchs of Antioch today with the unions. What do we do? Okay. Canon 19. I'll not read this stuff. I will note the bishops are each, if each individual metropolis is in charge of its own matters. No mention of appeals to Rome. So again, you have many canons showing that this is protected. Canon 25, the election of the bishop is up to the metropolitans, not the Bishop of Rome. I'm paraphrasing here, but everything is linked. So it is the metropolitans who decide. We see it in previous canons. It's the local bishops, the metropolitans, the local synod. That it would be a great moment for Rome to be mentioned here. Mentions ecclesiastical penalties, no exclusion for Rome again. And now, Canon 28, which is one of the most important canons. So I will read it. Following in all things the decisions of the Holy Father and acknowledging the canon, which has been just read, the 150 bishop, beloved of God, who assembled in the imperial city of Constantinople, which is New Rome, in the time of Emperor Theodosius, of happy memory. We also do enact and decree the same thing concerning the privilege of the Most Holy Church of Constantinople, which is New Rome. For the Father rightly granted the privilege to the throne of Old Rome because it was a royal city, and 150 most religious bishops, actuated by the same consideration, gave equal privilege to the most holy throne of New Rome, justly judging that the city, which is honored with the sovereignty of the Senate and enjoys the equal privilege with the old imperial Rome, should in ecclesiastical matter also be magnified as she is, and ranked next after her, so that in the Pontic, the Asian and Thracian dioceses, the metropolitan and only such bishop of the most for the dioceses aforesaid are among the barbarians, should be ordained by the aforesaid most holy throne of the most holy church of Constantinople. Every metropolitan of the aforesaid dioceses, together with the bishops of his province, ordering his own provincial bishops. It has been declared by the divine canons that as being above said, the metropolitans of aforesaid dioceses should be ordained by the Archbishop of Constantinople after proper election, which have been according to custom and have been reported to him. Long canon, but it unpacks a lot. So it it basically says that Constantinople now is the metropolitan, the patriarch of some regions. So it still affirms these regions as having internal proceedings, but the ultimate ordination, as we've seen before, belongs to the metropolitan of Constantinople. What's more interesting is that it says here that it says here that the prerogatives that belong to Rome because it was an old capital, and today it was a royal city.
Right.
And at the time of the council, this council, the new capital, which enjoys the sovereignty of the Senate, which is a new capital, is Constantinople. So this should be moved there. Right. And this canon is interesting because it's just recognizing the canons we've seen we've seen before.
Right.
It's just recognizing the canons of I think it was in Ephesus or in Constantinople, but it's a previous canon, so it just recognizes that Constantinople has attained this level of primacy there, and right. It is being transferred. But there's no mention of it being because of Peter or it being because of apostolic succession of Saint Andrew. It's because it is the capital of the empire.
Right. You can easily see how, because it was the royal city, how papists are going to distort that to say, well, it's the royal city because of the succession of Peter, when that's not what it's saying at all.
Yeah, I mean, Peter isn't the king. It was the emperor who was the king. Actually, we'll touch on the papal state, because the papal state exists only after the donation of Pepe, not the donation of Constantine, which we've talked about quite a bit. So this is the end of the fourth council, and we've seen the same things. Bishops enjoying some freedom. There not being universal jurisdiction. By the way, there is special jurisdiction given in Constantinople here, just like it was given to Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome. But it doesn't mean that Constantinople leads the entire church. It doesn't mean that Constantinople is supreme and all these things. Right. So it will be the end of the fourth synod. And the fifth and sixth synod are going to be a little bit easier to talk about, because the fourth and fifth synod didn't have any canons. But they nonetheless prove the papacy wrong. So we're going to start with the fifth synod, and the fifth synod was actually opposed. Like, the reunion of the synod was opposed by the Pope, and the Pope was actually held hostage by Emperor Saint Justinian. So I think it was Italian at the time. So he opposed the synod. The synod still met. The synod was still declared ecumenical. If the Pope wanted an ecumenical synod, then it should have been, it would not have assembled. If today the Pope calls a synod, someone calls a synod and the Pope said, no synod, there's no synod in the Roman Catholic Church. We don't see this understanding. This synod condemned Origen. That's the most, one of the most interesting parts of it. And then we can move on to the sixth council. And before talking about the sixth council, I need to talk about what happened before. So the sixth council is a council against monothelitism. And what is especially interesting is that before this council was united, so there's been this big monothelite crisis all over the empire. And there was actually some fight against it from Rome. So there was a synod with Saint Maximus, and the Pope at the time called the Lateran Synod of 649. And this synod declared Orthodox theology that later inspired the Sixth Council. And the Pope wanted it to be ecumenical, and it is not. So the Pope declared a council to be ecumenical, and it was not ecumenical. So they had to wait until the Sixth Synod. And the Sixth Synod is famous because there's been a letter with Rome declaring primacy, and we don't know if it's primacy or not. And he says that Rome didn't fail in this crisis. And actually, no. this synod actually ends up condemning Honorius as a heretic, which meant that a pope had heretic doctrine and expressed heretic doctrine. Many Roman Catholic apologists will try to fight this, say, oh no, he was just anathematized for his behavior. No, he is clearly condemned as a heretic. The Shafset, so you can just go on ccel.com. You just type CCL Council, and you'll see in the Shafset, it brings forth all of the arguments that shows that Honorius is being condemned as a heretic. Among them, the fact that people literally called him a heretic during the council, that the synod ended with him being called a heretic, that that his name was cited among the heretic by on a diptych by the emperor, and you can even find intronization of popes. You know, there's a rite for intronization, and they actually sung until schism. They sung that Honorius was a heretic. They sang the anathemas, including anathema against Nestorius. This contradicts papal infallibility, because this was clearly a doctrine of the Pope, and here Rome failed. You know, and if Rome can fail, why is it being held as a that is a rock of the church, a standard of the church? And here it's can be argued that it's infallible. Of course, you know, if you tried enough, nothing is infallible except what you like. But that's a matter of reception theory. The Shafset is especially good at this.
And that, you know, discussing St. Maximus and how he was appealing to Rome highlights this position that we've already covered in previous canons about you know, you can Rome as a place where you can sort of appeal to, and he was doing that because the monothelitism was being perpetuated by the emperor, by the bishops in Constantinople. Correct. And then he's later, and then he, you know, that's later confirmed in the Sixth Council.
Yeah. So here we can see again, you know, the church father displaying this understanding, and the synod would have been declared ecumenical if the Roman understanding of the primacy of the Pope, you know, and him determining which synods are ecumenical, was enforced. It's not the case.
Exactly. And that was in Northern Africa, wasn't it?
What do you mean? No.
The council with St. Maximus and the Pope, where they were trying to condemn monothelitism at the time.
No, it's Latran.
And then they were both end up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's in Latran, so if it's in Rome.
Okay. So for some reason, when I was doing my research on Maximus, I was under the impression that that Lateran Council was actually held in Northern Africa, where they were condemning monothelitism, and then the Pope is actually, he ends up dying, you know, and then Maximus is also sent away after that council. He's arrested just a few years later by the powers of Constantinople.
Yeah, he's actually condemned for this. Yeah. Nonetheless, the point remains. And now we go into something that's very, very interesting, because that's probably the council canon-wise that is the most interesting. It's the Trullo Synod. So as I mentioned, there was no canon pronounced in the Fifth and Sixth Council. And after the Sixth Council, bishops were called again 10 years later by Emperor Justinian II to declare canons. And these canons were later accepted by Rome. Pope Adrian accepted it, and the canons were especially important during the iconoclast crisis, because these canons mention icons. And we're gonna cover this when we talk about the Seventh Council. But this council, the Trullo Synod, so 692, is one of the most extensive synod, and it has many canons. So first canon, as usual, is declaring the previous canons to be valid. Canon 2 is about affirming synodality. and people who breach the synodality to be excommunicated. It gives a list of canons as well. So there's no exemption for the Pope. It also mentions canons of Basil, for example, canons of the apostles. It mentions Saint Cyprian, and so on. It mentioned many church fathers, which are very much Orthodox. Let's continue. Canon 6 explicitly permits men to be married before ordination, which is something that was no longer in application in Rome. And we'll see that this synod actually wants to. So there are many actions against corruption in the church, and actions against Judaizing heresies or more Gnostic type heresies. We're going to mention them. So you have Canon 8, again about synodality, about a united synod, quite often no mention of Rome. Canon 11, condemning the consumption of assembled bread. So the consumption of unleavened bread as Judaizing actually. Canon 13. So Canon 13 is about chastity, and oftentimes Roman Catholic will point to the Synod of Carthage, which says that you need to be chaste if you want to serve the Eucharist. But priests can be married and priests can serve the Eucharist. So the interpretation of that the Truller Synod that is accepted later on by the Papacy is that chastity in that sense means the priest not having relations with his wife before the Eucharist. I think it's 1 day or so. We have different canons in terms of this, but so chastity like this is described. It also condemns practices you have in Rome. So, for example, in Rome at the time, you had people who were actually divorcing because before taking their vows. So you had this idea of chastity equals more grace and so on. It's actually condemned in previous synods that we cover that are not ecumenical, but that are recognized by the ecumenical synod. Canon 19 is again about the teachings of the fathers, that we need to benchmark what we believe according to the fathers. Canon 20, bishops are not allowed to teach in any other cities. No special exemption for Rome. No mention of the universal teaching of Rome. Canon 21. Those who have become guilty of crime against the canons and this account subject to complete and perpetual deposition are degraded. There is so basically it says that if you breach the canons, you are to be degraded. You have your specific punishments. In that for the whole church, there is no special exemption for Rome. So if Rome breaks the canon, the Bishop of Rome breaks the canon, he is out as well. Canon 25, it's about referring controversies to the provincial synod. No mention of Rome. Canon 32 is about the Eucharist again. So Canon 32 is about saying that so it's countering the Judaizing heresy you had in Armenia, and it's saying that the Eucharist, what is in the cup, should be water mixed with wine, as is tradition, and the sacrament should be given in both kinds, so there's the wine and the bread, which today is no longer done in the Roman Church, except some Vatican II, but at some point it wasn't done at all. Canon 55. Canon 55 is contradicting a Roman custom when it comes to Lent and people who were fasting on Sundays and Saturdays, and that's why we're in the period of Lent right now. That's why when we are in Lent, we cannot do the strictest fast during Saturdays and Sundays, because we need to honor the Sabbath and honor the day of the Lord. Canon 82. This one is very interesting. It's a canon that specifically mentions icons and that states that you cannot represent Christ in a purely metaphorical form.
Right.
And it mentioned Christ being represented as a lamb, metaphorically. Yep. And people were starting to take him as a metaphor. So this is a canon that was used against the iconoclast in the next council, in the seventh council. And today, Rome doesn't do it. Like, I think one of the Pope today has two different crosses. One of them represents Christ as the Agnus Dei. And in many medieval and so on representation, you have Christ as being just a metaphorical lamb.
Right. Same with Renaissance art.
Yeah. And this is a canon that broke, this is a canon that showed and defeated ultimately iconoclasm. Mm-hmm. And it's not being followed. Right. So you cannot defend the statues, the icons, and things like this, if you don't even follow the canons that was a precursor to this.
Right.
Canon 19 is actually referring to another canon that was in Nicaea that I didn't mention. The Canon 90 is about no kneeling being permitted on Sunday, and
of course, I had no idea about that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was forbidden because you had people rolling themselves down and wanting to humble themselves among Gnostic sects, and we don't do this on Sunday because on Sunday we're happy because we're resurrected. Right. Anastasia, the Voskresenie, me being standing again, literally. So during the day of the resurrection, we do not kneel; we are standing. So yes, and now we move to Nicaea too, which is very interesting because we're gonna give some background on Nicaea too. Mm-hmm. So Nicaea too was the seventh ecumenical synod. And this synod is fighting against the iconoclast. So people starting to smash icons. And it establishes, first of all, that we should not worship icons, but that we should venerate icons. And something that's very interesting is that you have people using this, such as Eric Ibarra, saying that, actually the veneration of icons means that there is evolution of dogma in the Orthodox Church. No, because specifically, not only do we determine in these councils that theologically icons existed, that we are icons of Christ, that's why we are being incensed, we are icons of God. Christ is an icon of God. We have the image of Edessa, or even the, which is the Orthodox equivalent to the Turin, the Shroud of Turin. So we have these icons. We know historically that they have been present as well. We know theologically that we have a theology of incarnation. So we need to represent things physically. Right. We need to represent Christ physically because Christ was a real man. That's why we don't represent him as just a lamb either. So this is attested very early. In the catacombs, we can find it. We can find icons in the Bible, in the temple. Right. We can find veneration of objects like this, with the brazen serpent, which is being destroyed when it's being worshipped. So it's being venerated, it's fine. When it's being worshipped, it's not fine. We can find it in Daniel 5, where objects of worship are to be venerated, are to be respected. So in Daniel 5, you have invaders taking the vases of the temple and desecrating them by actually praying to idols in front of the vases. And the fact that they desecrate objects of the cult by adoring something else. So basically, adoring another god is rejecting the veneration of the vases, and they're being killed for it. Daniel 5 is an excellent biblical show against iconoclasm. Mm-hmm. So it's always been here, and the tradition of the council, as expressed by St. Vincent of Florence, is just here to determine whether a doctrine has been believed by everyone, everywhere since the beginning. And it's not an evolution of dogma. It's just respecting icons as object of worship and venerating them as such, as every object of worship is venerated. That's why we have people kissing the Evangelium during liturgy. So this is actually showing that there is no evolution of dogma, and Canon 1 specifically says there is no evolution of dogma. So do you imagine how ridiculous it is when people bring veneration of icons as an evolution of dogma in the Seventh Council, and the first decree of the Seventh Council is saying there's no evolution of dogma.
Right.
Canon 3, yeah. I mean, we need to look like, you know, what the church is. We are not a Renaissance aesthetic church. We are not a Byzantine church. We are not the medieval scholastic church. We are the apostolic church. So we look at what is tradition. It doesn't evolve. Roman Catholic need evolution of dogma because many dogma like the Immaculate Conception and things like this self-admittedly don't appear in tradition, or even fought by their doctors as an innovation, like Aquinas, Bernard of Clairvaux. So yeah, they need it. But we are the Church of the Apostles. So we are looking for something apostolic. We're not looking for something Byzantine. We're not looking for something Frankish. We're not looking for something medieval, for something Renaissance, for late antiquity. We're looking for the Church of the Apostles. Tomorrow, if the apostles come back, they will understand our worship. It will be the same thing, because all of our liturgies are based on the liturgy of St. James, which was practiced since the beginning, which is the mother of all the liturgies. It will look like the worship at the temple. It has the same characteristic. Or churches are modeled after the temple, which is modeled after the tabernacle, which is modeled after Eden. So even the saints in Eden that are praying with us during the liturgy, they see the same things. If tomorrow the apostle come, maybe the style of icon, maybe it will be more luxurious than the persecuted church from the beginning in the catacombs, but it is the same worship in essence. But that's what's very important. It is a church that did not change. And if you are studying church history, that's what you'll come to. And for example, very, very clever church historians such as Abbé Guettet, who was one of the best historians of his time about the church, came to this realization and came back to Orthodoxy, which was preserved in the East after schism. Canon 10, it's again about bishops staying in their jurisdiction. Canon 11 is about establishing economy. So these are accountants for the church, and even then it protects the independence of churches. It says that even though Constantinople might have some special right, this prerogative doesn't apply to setting up accountants in the other churches that are under her. So we can see that even inside of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the rights of the local churches are being preserved. So even when Constantinople gets all the prerogatives of Rome, it is still not supreme, which meant that Rome didn't have supreme characteristics, even inside its jurisdiction. So yeah, these are the canons of the 7 ecumenical councils that are in direct contradiction to the Roman See. You have some people who say, oh, the Pope rejected Canon 28 of Chalcedon, which then begs the question, if he's leading the council, if he's the one who determines the council, why does he need to reject this canon if he's leading it? At least that's an argument Eric Ibarra tries to give to people. Say, oh, you know, the Orthodox have to fight against their own popes. No, we don't have to fight against our own popes of Rome, because we believe that the popes can make errors. We believe that we have saints that made errors, and we don't have to interpret it in a papal way as you do. We don't have to presuppose it. However, the Roman Catholic understanding makes the Roman Catholic have to fight against their own synods. It shows a disconnect between the East and the West, you know. So if you want to be consistent with the papal understanding, you have to see the council as a rebellious force, but this rebellious force is ecumenical. And you can see it in the historians. So, for example, Trullo is basically showing that Rome is straying away, and Trullo is being affirmed in the Seventh Council. And what Joseph Karl Hefele has to do in his History of the Councils is to say, oh, but actually Rome never agreed to any of the canons of the Seventh Council. That's what he has to say in in his History of the Council. You can look it up. It's an interesting complementary document to this to this show. Actually, FLA is quite honest to an extent. He will say that Honorius was excommunicated. Even then, at the time, he was pressured not to. But yeah, he has to resort to saying that this council that is supposed to be under the authority of Rome didn't accept a single canon of it. So if the Pope is supposed to preside over all the council and describe, why don't you even agree to the canons? Why do you pick whatever you want from the council? That's actually what many evangelicals do. They will go to Nicaea and say, oh, the divinity of Christ is good, but all the canons, we don't agree to them. Right. So yeah, the church was infallible during the declaration of faith, but then it fell into disarray during the canons. Okay, so it also quotes the apostolic canons. I'm not going to go over all of them, but they are those are basically going the same way. Apostolic canon, canon 1, let a bishop be ordained by 2 or 3 bishops, so not by the Pope. Let not a bishop, presbyter, or deacon put away his wife under the pretense of religion, which was practiced in Rome at some time, so canon 5. Canon 15, bishops are not allowed to leave into other jurisdiction without a proper blessing. No exemption for the Pope, so no Avignon papacy. Canon 15, if any presbyter, deacon, so basically Canon 15 and 33 are saying the same thing. Canon 34 says that the bishop of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as the head, and do nothing of consequence without his consent. So the question is, does this mean Vatican I, or does this mean that there's local primates? And if it's Vatican I, why is it not simply described as being Rome? There's no mention of Rome. There's no mention of Peter here. And also the same canon as the Orthodox understanding of the Filioque mentioned in it. God will be glorified through the Lord in the Holy Spirit. So that's the not that there's an Orthodox Filioque, but that's a per filium, not ontological but economical. Canon 35, bishops are to ordain visit their own jurisdiction without exemption from the Pope. Canon 39, priests and deacons are subject to the authority of the individual bishops. I'm paraphrasing, but everything's going to be down there. Canon 50, Canon 45, excommunication if you pray with heretics. Canon 64 is the same. Canon 74, if any bishop is accused, he can be tried and sentenced. No exemption for Rome. There is no, Rome is still subject to judgment, even though Vatican I says that nobody can judge the See of Rome. And Canon 81 is very interesting. If any bishop can come to become a leader or to be involved in purely temporal affairs, he is to resign.
Right.
And actually, but the Bible is quoted here, no one can serve two masters. And Rome is a theocracy. The Pope is a prince, actually. It's a principality that was established by Pepin the Short, the Frankish king who wanted to vassalize the papacy. So he gave the territory not back to Byzantium. He didn't establish his own stuff. He established the Pope as a temporal king. And that's where the idea of the 3 crowns, the tiara. First it was 2 and it was 3. The tiara says that, the Pope is like this. You have declaration from Boniface the 8th or 7th that say, oh, the church will two sword. One sword is the sword of the church, the other sword is the sword of the state for the church. So this idea of papal supremacy over temporal matters is not present in the apostolic canons. The apostolic canons are not recognized by Rome, but they are quoted all over this synod, all over the synod.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we conclude, so these were the 7 ecumenical synod. All of them are accepted by Rome. So at some point, Rome needs to say, oh, we accepted true law, no, we don't accept true law. We accepted the canon of the 7th council, no, we don't accept the canons of the 7th council. Pick and choose, make your own synods. Calvin does the same thing. Should I say more?
Go ahead. I mean, go ahead and educate, man. I love this because you're really educating myself as well. I mean, this is not an area where I'm an expert. So whatever you want to say, go ahead.
So I want to mention some other synods that sometimes are appealed to, or some synods that actually refute Rome directly. So first of all, we need to understand that synods were not, like, the church doesn't need ecumenical synods. Ecumenical means ecumene, meaning in the empire, meaning imperial. All of the synods we've mentioned have been called by the emperor. Today there's no emperor. The church can still survive without it. There have been synods like the Jerusalem synod that is being accepted by everybody. The Palamite synod, which teaches essence energy, which is biblical, which is not an new dogma or an evolution of dogma. No, it's biblical. You can find it in all the fathers. I recommend the book from Jean-Claude Larcher, The Theology of the Divine Energies, from the beginnings of Christianity to St. John of Damascus. He shows that it's consistently present. But there have been local synods, and these local synods sometimes are mentioned in the ecumenical synod, so they're not as authoritative, but sometimes they are ecumenized, and sometimes people will appeal to them. And one of these early synods is, for example, the Synod of Elvira, which is rejected by our church. And why do Roman Catholic appeal to the Synod of Elvira? Because it talks about mandatory priestly celibacy. What they do not know is that the Synod of Elvira is also firmly iconoclastic. It forbids icons, images in the church. So by appealing to the Synod, you are contradicting the statues, the Renaissance art, and the pre-Renaissance art, before it got wild. So that's a bad thing to bring up. Another synod that's very interesting is the Synod of Gangra. So the Synod of Gangra is the one we use to contradict the moral veganism, because it's a synod that is fighting against the Gnostic tendencies. Among the Gnostic tendencies is the rejection of marriage. And so
what year is that? What year is that one?
Yeah, we don't exactly know, but it's between 355 and 340. It's been acknowledged by ecumenical synods. So this one is ecumenized. And it states, if, for example, Canon 4, if anyone shall maintain concerning a married presbyter that is not lawful to partake of the oblation when he offers it, let him be anathema. So you cannot refuse the Eucharist because a priest is married. How many people would reject this today in Rome and therefore be anathematized?
Right.
This synod is very interesting. I suggest everybody reads it. Synod of Gangra. It also condemns liberation theology. Do I have it somewhere? Oh no. Yeah, Canon 3. If anyone shall teach a slave under pretext of piety to despise his master and to run away from his service, and not to serve his own master with goodwill and all honor, let him be anathema. So yes, fighting for civil rights, instead of divine rights, is associated with Gnostic theology. Wow. It's in the Bible. Basically, Christ is not here to change the worldly order. Christ is not a revolutionary. Because if Christ was a revolutionary, it wouldn't be a religion. It would be a political party. And it would have been quelled.
And that's why the Jews were upset he wasn't a political figure. He wasn't a political head.
Yeah. And that's why today, the Jews and some evangelicals are still waiting for a Messiah that is a political figure.
Right.
That political figure creates political parties. They don't create religions. This synod is also interesting because it condemns moral veganism. Canon 9 also, like, if anyone shall remain virgin or observe abstinence or observe continence, abstaining from marriage because he abhors it and not on the account of the beauty of holiness and virginity, let him be anathema. Canon 10, if anyone observes while living as a virgin life for the Lord's sake shall treat arrogantly the marriage, let him be anathema. So, we see this more nuanced Orthodox view on virginity, the fact that virginity is good, that marriage can bring a lot of great things, and we see this continued, in the Synod of True Law, for example. So this is in direct line with what we've seen. Another council that is interesting to mention, since the West is absolutely enamored with the theology of St. Augustine, to the point that the theology is basically sola Augustina.
Right.
The Synod of Carthage. So many people will bring Saint Augustine was a father of the church, by the way, who has some errors, as do some fathers of the church. But the Synod of Carthage actually shows the more African ecclesiology of Augustine. So basically, there's been this long-standing conflict between Rome and Carthage. Not the Punic War, but you had the African Schism, you had Saint Cyprian being part of this. And actually there was the Synod of Carthage in 418, which sets the standard Western canon of the Bible. Actually, another refutation against Calvinism and stuff like this, because canons of the Bible were never understood to be, book from book, a book cover to cover. There's always some distinction between the canons. You have the canon of Basil, you have the canon that you will see in the canon of the Apostles. It's never exactly the same, because we understand the Bible to be part of the tradition. So you need tradition to teach, and some will include this, some will not include this, some will even add extra. Some will add books that are not inspired but are still good to read. So it vindicates the traditional position, because there's not a unified canon in the early church. You have different canons, so there's no especially preserved canon. The Protestants are still working from. There's a canon of Carthage. Then you have the Protestant removing books and stuff like this. So there's no divinely protected canons. There's a divinely protected tradition. That's what Paul says. Paul says at some point, keep the scripture, keep the traditional reading of the scripture, and keep what has been taught to you by letter and by word. So yeah, we can see this teaching. So it actually rebukes parasitism and sola scriptura as well. So that's the Synod of Carthage 418, and in the Synod of Carthage 419, you have the Augustinian ecclesiology kicking in. So this is a synod that is presided by Saint Augustine, and you have Canon 28 directly denying appealing to Rome. Presbyter, deacons, or clerics who shall think good to carry appeals in their causes across the water shall not be admitted to communion. So it's talking about Rome, across the water from Carthage to Italy. It also seemed good that presbyter, deacons, and other of the inferior clergy in the causes which they had, if they were dissatisfied with the judgment of the bishop, let be the neighboring bishop with the consent of their own bishop hears them, and the local bishop who have been called in judge between them. But if they think they have cause to appeal from these, they shall not betake themselves to judgment from beyond seas, but to the primate of their own province, or else to a universal council, as also been decreed concerning bishops. But whoever shall think to carry an appeal across the water shall be received. But whoever shall think good to carry an appeal across the water shall be received to communion by no one within the boundaries of Africa. So here you have the African bishops actually affirming the fact that the African church can work without Rome. So even if it's technically within Rome boundaries, no, we if there's a problem, it is to be resolved under the head of the African church, under between local bishops. And if there's a real problem, Rome isn't the ultimate judge; it's the Ecumenical Council.
Right.
Canon 39 is again about bishops ordaining bishops. No mention of Rome. So, I mean, every bishop until then would have been excommunicated ipso facto for not asking the Pope. By the way, the fact that the Pope is the one who chooses a bishop only comes after schism and what's called the investiture controversy. So basically, the emperor was naming bishops, and the bishops had a say in the emperor, and the emperor had an influence in naming the Pope. And there was this event called the flight to Canossa, and basically the emperor was humiliated by local nobles and the Pope, and had to declare that no, it is a Pope alone that names bishops. Before that, it didn't exist. So the Pope, being the sole person to ordain bishops, only comes from political meddling, which is against Apostolic Canon 81 as well. And then you have the canon of the Council of Carthage, Canon 121, of those who neglect the people belonging to them. It's quite long, but basically it says that a bishop cannot leave. He cannot leave his diocese. He cannot leave his church. He cannot go away for extended period of time. And wouldn't that apply? If this canon was being understood later on, wouldn't it be refuting the Avignon papacy? Because the Roman Catholic belief is that for hundreds of years, the papacy actually moved from Rome to Avignon. So
right.
Avignon becomes the seat of Peter. I thought there was something special about Rome, but not anymore. Oh yeah, it's a special place. It's more special than Antioch and Alexandria, which are in patron succession, because Peter died there, and then we moved to Avignon. Yeah. Some other councils that are interesting to mention. Oh yeah, there's a French one. It's interesting. So the first French king, Frankish king who converted was Clovis. And actually, if you read early church history of France, it is so the book is from Saint Gregory of Tours, and it is let me find the name. It's Saint Gregory of Tours, the history of the Franks, and it talks about all the Frankish kings in a Christian light, and it is constantly talking about Sinfonia, what Roman people call today Caesaropapism. It's talking about the link between Rome and the king. It's talking about not Rome and the king, the church and the king. Peter and Rome are not mentioned specifically. There might be some mention. I didn't go through all of it. But the interesting part is the first king, and the first king is Clovis. And there's a specific mention of his baptism. And the baptism of Clovis is described as being a perfectly Orthodox baptism, but not the one you will see being administered to an adult in the Roman Catholic Church today. It is full immersion, 3 times, followed directly by chrismation. And actually, Clovis is directly compared to Constantine. He is being called the new Constantine. So you have this idea of link between the state and the church, the king, and the church, the local church. And this is actually shown in the Synod of Orleans. So that's right before Clovis's death. I don't have a link for this one because it's only in French, but the Synod of Orleans establishes a French church, basically a French jurisdiction, still within Rome's boundary. And it states, for example, that anybody who wants to become a member of the clergy needs to refer it to the king, and then the king can allow it. Isn't this Caesaropapism?
Yeah, I'd say
and
so.
There's only one exception. There's only one exception, and the exception is if you are sons of clergy. which implies that clergy consumed their marriage and were married.
Right.
Because the idea was about
Right.
the church not taking too much land. So of course the land would already have been transferred if you became a member of clergy.
Right.
That's why there's a specific exemption. That's why people get mad when I say, look at the early history of the French church. It's not really papal. It's very Byzantine, and actually Byzantium acknowledges, because all of the other barbarian tribes were Arians, and Clovis was the first to convert to the undivided church, Orthodoxy. And actually Byzantium, Constantinople at the time, is the Eastern Roman Empire, was very happy about this and sent several titles of consul to Clovis. And we find members of the Merovingian dynasty being buried with the cape of the consul and the ring of the consuls. So Byzantium was acknowledging them as Orthodox. So that's why people who want to talk about them being Catholic and stuff, and at the same time Byzantium being Orthodox and the West being Orthodox, they're creating a schism before the schism. And if we look at the history of the French Church, the early history, I'm not talking about the Carolingian, I'm talking about the Merovingian, first dynasty. It's pretty much Orthodox. And the entire book, History of the Franks, is it's about Symphonia in a very Byzantine style. Written by a saint in both churches. History of the Franks by St. Gregory of Tours is a great read if you want to look at early church history. And the Church of France always maintains this, and we can see it with the Synod of Aachen. So even when Charlemagne, so of the new dynasties, the Carolingian that came after, wants to establish a new hegemony, wants to claim his title of emperor, he does it with his own church. He does it by convening, for example, a synod that is heretical, the Synod of Aachen, who actually contradicts Ephesus by adding the filioque. So the addition of the filioque is heretical from the Orthodox perspective. Absolutely. But is not ecclesiologically consistent with Roman Catholic ecclesiology. Because when he does this, he does it without the approval of the Pope, by convening a council himself, without inviting the Pope. The Pope says that it is like, you cannot add something to the creed. We have people talking, today, the climate is very ecumenical, and basically you cannot talk about differences in the filioque, but Leo opposed this addition to the creed. So regardless of Leo's opinion, he wrote specifically on 2 tables, two shields, 2 silver shields, the creed in Greek and in Latin, with a reminder that it cannot be changed. That's what the Pope did when this happened. Also, that rebukes the linguistic argument, because the Pope specifically equivocates the creed of Nicaea, Constantinople, to a creed in Latin. So we cannot say, oh no, we cannot the filioque because of linguistic problems. No, the Pope specifically covered that by doing it in both languages and posting it on St. Peter's Basilica, so everybody could see. Also, the Pope convened 2 counter-councils to fight against this. So here, from the Roman Catholic perspective, there's a problem, because if Caesaropapism is a heresy, the filioque, which is one of your chief dogma and the one that will cause schism, as predicted by Pope Leo III, it is a Caesar-Papist dogma, and it shows that even then Charlemagne, didn't really care about the papal supremacy, it seems.
Right. Apparently.
We can see this consistently through the history. So I've mentioned Canossa. Canossa was with the Holy Roman Empire, and you have the Holy Roman Emperor being bossed around because he had powerful vassals that were members of clergy, so bossed around by the Pope. France went the other way, and it maintained a separation between Rome and the government, and between the government and the Holy Roman Empire. You had this say that the king is emperor in his kingdom. So you had this idea of not French freedom, Renaissance style, revolution style, but French independence. and it can be shown very easily. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ecclesiology of some churches in France, but we have kings like King Philippe le Bel, when the Pope declares, declaration of supremacy during the early Renaissance, like Middle Ages. King Philippe le Bel actually sends a commander of knights, captures the Pope, and rough him up. That's in 1333. So today you will have many royalists in France who will, try to say, oh, the France was Catholic and stuff like this. And like, yeah, but this king is like roughing up the Pope because he's going against the interest of France. And today you're a nationalist, so you're more right wing. And the Pope is saying, he has a left wing agenda, mondialist agenda, globalist agenda. Why don't you do this? Oh, it's not Vatican I compliant. we had things like Charles of Fol, who convened a synod in Paris after a papal declaration of supremacy again, and basically he had the French clergy on his side, and he had the declaration saying, the Pope needs to step down, or I'm going down to Rome and I'm going to burn him. Not very Vatican I compliant. French clergy was on his side. This one, they send a letter and stuff like this. You had the idea of papal interdict, ecclesiological interdict, ecclesiastic interdict, sorry. And this is the idea that the Pope can declare that an entire country doesn't get any more sacraments. It's something that comes after the schism, and actually is one of the political causes of political Protestantism. Because imagine tomorrow, the Pope doesn't like your king, right. The Pope doesn't like your policy as a king, and then he declares that nobody is to receive sacraments, so everybody is going to hell. Nobody can cleanse his sins, according to Roman Catholic ecclesiology and things like this, and extra purgatory for everybody. And of course, your population is rebelling against you, and the Pope is using this stuff as political. We can see that most kings of the Valois dynasty and some of the Capetian dynasty were under this stuff, and still the clergy managed to roll to an extent. So we can see that the clergy was a bit more free. It wasn't directly attached to Rome. Mm-hmm. There are other examples. That, for example, this is a great book that came out in France. People went into the history of it. St. Louis was actually excommunicated at some point. So St. Louis is the only French king who is a saint. He was under excommunication. I think 23 members of his dynasty were either under excommunication or interdict. So how can you be, you have many people from the neo-monarchists in France. I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not affiliated with anything in politics, but if you're a monarchist, if you're pro-king, if you're Protestant, why are you still bowing to Rome? You had, for example, Louis XIV, the Sun King, who had no problem, and actually Cardinal Richelieu as well, who had no problem allying with the Protestant Swedes to fight and kill Catholic Germans during the 30 Years' War.
Right.
We had Francois Ier, Francis V of France, who allied with the Ottomans because it was against his interests. So it's a bit contradictory to see France as this sacred nation in that sense. And if you look at it, it retained a very, I would not say Orthodox ecclesiology, but of course
Catholic.
Yeah, clearly, and that's why you had Louis XIV also, interestingly, when the Pope wanted to show off about being the vicar of Christ, Louis XIV started to style the French kings as lieutenants of Christ. So you're keeping the chair, but I'm the lieutenant here. You had widespread belief of the French king being able to heal people, of being a semi-Davidic line. So we can see the idea of Davidic covenant still existing. So it retains some level of Orthodox ecclesiology. I'm not saying that France was Orthodox during this time. I'm just saying it was something else, or that Roman Catholicism evolved. And the evolution, the last step came with Vatican I. And Vatican I is when you had factions in France of Gallicans revolting against this. Among them, Vladimir Guette, who said, oh no, Vatican I is declaring It's not how the church works. So today, among the trad world, everybody is saying, "Oh, Vatican II changed everything."
Right.
Vatican I was a worse cataclysm, and if Vatican II changed everything, it's because it was given this power by Vatican I. The
Right.
problems comes before,
Right.
and when you remove Vatican I, you can go back all the way to Trent, and you can look at early church history. And now we're coming back to what would be my conclusion: is that if you're asking yourself question, go look into this council, go look into early history, and it might work if you presuppose the Vatican I papacy, but I really don't know. But sometimes people can find some leeway. Sometimes people can give weird interpretation. But among the canons we've covered, there are probably like a dozen that are about bishops being independent, bishops having their own jurisdiction. So to come back to what we were saying at the beginning, the four hoops plus the fifth. If you look at history, we don't see universality. We don't see that Rome has specific powers. So we don't see the other point. We don't see supremacy.
Right.
We don't see exclusivity. Yeah, so there's no exclusivity, and we don't see immediacy. We see that this idea of Rome having power is something that grew, and the current update isn't trad. It's from the 1870s, and it's not, if you look at Pius X, a lot of trads will see Pius X as the paramount pope, the Platonic form of the perfect pope.
Right.
He reformed a lot of things. Vatican I was part of this. Vatican I was supposed to be a streamlining of the religion, almost according to the scientific method, almost according to the new production method, to the new absolutism. This council happened just before the formation of the national German Empire. It happened after Napoleon. So there was this idea of streamlining, of making everything apostolic, of just keeping it, waving some councils around, never going deep into them. If you compare the proceedings of Vatican I, it's very, very short, because it was also interrupted by the Italians invading Rome and the Pope just having, the small Vatican here. But yes, you can see that, it's streamlining. It's just appealing to evidence on some verses, even though they have never been understood to be self-evident. Appealing to, the keys, the robes, the sheep, and I prayed for you. These are the 4 verses, making them seem as evident. And we've shown that, from the fathers and the council, it was not. So actually, if you look at it, Vatican I is a real change, and it's really modernization already. So of course it's not the love bears modernization. It's not Vatican II and so on, but it's still a profound change in the church. And we've seen it with the councils. There are many other examples. There were just some canon from some councils. On the live stream we talked about the 14th Synod when we were with Jay, so you can also watch this. It also shows papal contradiction, Pope changing their mind, Pope not ultimately deciding which synod it is, going back and forth. So that would be my point. If you want to look at the early church, don't just go to quote mines, because of course you will have quote mines from either side. Go look at ccl.org, the councils. Go look at what, for example, Schaff said. Is an evangelical, but he's still very scholarly about this. You can look at all of this, and you can look at what Vatican claims to be apostolic. So Pastor Artonus and the Declaration of Vatican I, the 4 hoops plus the infallibility, it doesn't work. It doesn't match up.
Not at all. Well, you have anything else that you want to add before we conclude this conversation?
No, it's been really great.
Yeah, thank you.
Like
this has been incredibly educational.
Yeah, it is very extensive. I would like to thank everybody who helped me. So the for Orthodox community, Seraphim actually put out this everything on Jay's server, Jay's analysis, Jay Dyer. We did also a lot of work, and we allowed a lot of people who did a lot of work to group up and make good apologetics. And of course, you for having me.
Oh, no, man. Anytime, anytime. In fact, I'd love to have you come back and talk more about this Orthodoxy in Western Europe, whether it be about Ireland, France, Germany, all that stuff. I would love for you to do a whole nother sort of lecture for us all on Orthodoxy in Western Europe.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff has been quite extensive, but yeah, I can even recommend some people to do this. And yeah, I could do something specifically about France. I've got an article, but I've summarized the article grossly. Oh, something to add. But you will see people talking about, the French Catholic Church. You will have two steps that will be recurrent.
Mm-hmm.
The first one will be France vient de l'Église. So the idea is that France is the elder daughter of the church.
Yep.
Actually, it comes from the 1950s by a proto-socialist guy who taught almost liberation theology. So it's it's not all this. It doesn't refer to late medieval or early medieval stuff. It's very late. And the second one is Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc was actually tried and killed by French clergy for at the time they were under English control, but the idea of Friends of England didn't really exist. It was a dynastic struggle. They were killed by the clergy of Paris. Mm-hmm. and she was forgotten for quite a while. And do you have a guess when she was canonized? Do you have any guess?
No.
1920.
I was going to say 20th century, but
in 1920 she was canonized because the communists and Maurice Thorez were starting to use her as an anti-clerical feminist icon. She cross-dressed and she was a free woman, and she was killed by clergy. French clergy betrayed her, and the Pope wanted to, the Papacy, papal states wanted to incite some stuff, especially against the Gallicans were gone, but against the new government, wanted the royalists and the Action Française and so on to be more firmly on their side. And basically, it was a concession of the Pope to the French monarchists in 1920, just after the First World War. And people are still holding her, this perennial French figure. She was forgotten for quite a while. Wow. Today we have representation of her, with the Sacred Heart, which is something else that is very late in church history and contradicts actually the eighth anathematism of the Third Council. I'm not going to go very deep into it, but all this imagery of Catholic kings and Catholic warriors like Joan of Arc, always with Sacred Heart, always with the Jesuit son, and doesn't exist. People will call you revisionist for looking through history honestly like this, but then they don't understand that the real revision was this post-Vatican I thing. People will say, oh, France is a Catholic land because of all the apparitions, La Salette, Lourdes, and all this stuff. We cover this in a string of J. I think it's paid, but we can do a free version later on. But yeah, all these apparitions, appear after the fall of the Gallicans, after the watchdogs of French Christianity fell down. And all of these apparitions are just always linked to Rome. Lord is just a way to confirm Immaculate Conception, with Mary talking, with making grammar mistakes in French and say, I am this new dogma that the Pope proclaimed. So now it can be ecumenical. So now the Pope can declare dogma without a council. So this is a basis for infallibility. This is also late. So, and ultimately that's what we do with my collective. It's about showing history and reclaiming, Christian history in France. But it's not post-Vatican I papacy. It starts with clear orthodoxy, and then it evolves to pre-Gallicanism and to pure Gallicanism, and then it's wiped out. And one last thing, France is known to be secular. Mm-hmm. Why is France secular? Because the Declaration of Vatican I are so powerful. It's like, you need to submit to to the ordinary magisterium of the Pope, which nobody does, especially in the triad world. They would say, "Oh, you only have to submit to what's extraordinary, to what is the extraordinary magisterium, to the infallible stuff. No, you have to submit fully to the dogmatic, no, to the ordinary universal magisterium, lest you be deprived from faith and salvation." And this is actually confirmed in Canon 752 of the Roman Catholic Code. So this allows the Pope to be followed, and it shows there's a need to follow the Pope in any decision he makes as part of the ordinary magisterium pertaining to faith, morals, discipline, and organization of the church. And this was a lot of power. And France, which was at this point, Catholic, the government saw it as a pretext for revolution. Mm-hmm. People could be toppled by the Pope if the Pope so desired. And that's why we have secularization. The law of secularization in France appears 35 years, just 35 years after the Vatican I Council. And this in a country that has traditionally has, except for the revolutions, but that traditionally has clergy very much involved in its administration. This was a cataclysm. This was a cataclysm for Christianity in France. So wow. the hubris of Vatican I just destroyed Christianity and made France a very secular republic. Even before, we used to have clergy in the Senate, clergy in the assemblies and stuff. After this, every clergy was seen as a potential traitor because he was fully subjected to not only to the ordinary magisterium as every Catholic, but he was also submitted to hierarchical subordination, and that's why they were seen as almost inciting treachery. That's why it's hurting me when I see people parading with Vatican flag as a symbol, because it's a symbol of a foreign nation that doesn't really have our best interest in mind, especially with the migrant situation in Europe.
Right.
That's why I see it as it may, like, these people think it's their culture, but it's almost treachery.
Wow.
And it's not really their culture. If you look at history, if you dig before the Gallicans were pushed away, you don't see this. And if you dig even further, you have Orthodoxy and you have Clovis and you have all this stuff.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that would be my closing statement. If you don't want to go into all the fathers, to study the councils, keep an open mind. Don't fall for all the presuppositions. Don't fall for defaulting trad, and just try to be faithful. I'm not saying do the same thing as your ancestors, because that's not a good argument. But if you're looking at this, if you look at it from a Western perspective, and we have people doing with Ireland and England what I do with France, but basically it's not the papacy as it is today. So if you're looking at original untouched Christianity, whether be it the Christianity that first touched your nation or the Christianity of the apostle, which is what you should look for, apostolic Christianity, it's not in Rome today.
Wow.
And we've shown that if there was an undivided church that's split off in two parts, which church is keeping to the canons? Right. Many Roman apologists are gloating about, we are the church of the councils and so on. You don't even follow the canons of these councils. How can you say you have the postdesta, the potency of these councils, if you don't even follow them?
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. We gotta do it again soon, because we gotta get this information out as much as we can, because I think this is dramatically changed people's perspectives, not only of history of Western Europe, but how the evolution of really the Catholic Church, and how what we're dealing with now in the 21st century with their promotion of globalism, open borders, Pachamama, whatever it is, ecumenicism. We gotta do this again, and maybe just talk about Orthodoxy and France, and again try to get people to re-envision, reimagine, change people's perspectives on the history of Christianity in France. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. Thank you.
And before we hang up, you want to say how people can reach you on your Twitter or anywhere else if they have questions or want to
So
reach out to you? Go ahead.
I'll give a link to my Discord, which is French and English. I would advise people to also join JDI's Discord. Like I'm a mod there, and we are doing debates, questions, answering questions, evangelizing, giving informations to people. So there's a very, very competent team, including Seraphim, which I have to thank again. He's the one who put out this document. Twitter is something else. You cannot be as extensive, but
Right.
yes, I will give link to the Discord.
Okay.
That will be the base place if you want to reach me or reach very capable Orthodox apologists. If you simply have questions, feel free to join. Feel free to either listen to information or to confront yourself. We have the two versions: the more mild and the more harsh. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you, brother, and God bless your research. And again, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about this. And again, changing people's perspectives. I'm sure multiple people are going to listen to this, and a lot of this is going to be new information, just like for myself. So thank you again. And with that being said, God bless you. God bless everybody who is watching, and we will see you again soon. Take care.
Goodbye.